So, since the pandemic started in March 2020, our semi-weekly D&D game, which had always been in person, has moved online. We use a system called Roll20. It's good, but it's really confusing at the start. I now know how to use it as a player, but I asked Craig Mazin to talk me through how to use it as a DM. And since he was giving me a lesson, I figured we might as well record it so everyone else could learn as well. This goes on for about 2 hours, and I'm going to break this up into smaller videos so that if I get confused about something, I can go back and watch that specific part again. So I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, and this is going to be a lot. But if you are trying to learn how to use Roll20 as a dungeon master, DM or GM, whatever you want to call it, I have to tell you that this may be your best shot because I love Roll20. They have a pretty great system. Their tutorial is not great. I'm just going to say it. It's not very good. I found it to be incredibly insufficient. And what ended up happening was I did something like this with somebody else who was experienced. So hopefully, if you're trying, I can help you. And as you can see here, well, there's 410 hours played. You know what? I'm not ashamed of that at all. In fact, I want to try and get that. I want to try and get that to 10,000. 10,000 hours, John, and you get really good at something.
Indeed. I've learned that somewhere in a book. So
yeah, somewhere in a book. So what we're going to do is we're going to start fresh by creating a new game. When you create a game in Roll20, I mean, obviously you have to make yourself a little account. As you can see, I'm a pro level subscriber, which costs a bit of money. You can run a game and not be a pro level person. You do lose some access to some customizable functions that we're going to go into later that are pretty awesome. But you're going to start a new game. You can make a game out of scratch. You get yourself basically a big blank battle map, and you can build your own map or just put people in a limbo space if you want. But a lot of people are going to use built-in modules. The nice thing about Roll20 is they cover most of your major RPG systems. D&D is generally the most popular. So we're going to go ahead and create a new game. And when we do that, we're automatically going to run into a couple of choices. First things first, underneath this, I've already bought something. So up here in Marketplace, you can, what's new, browse your purchases and so on and so forth. If we look at my purchases, I'm just going to go to that for a second. You can see that I bought a bunch of things already. I bought the DM starter bundle, which includes the monster manual and the player's handbook. And then I also bought Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, and this module here, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and Curse of Strahd, and a lot of stuff. Xanathar's. I went crazy and I bought as much as I could. Some token sets, so much. Here's the thing. You don't have to buy a ton, but you are going to need some compendium material. Compendium is the Roll20 term for rule books and source books. Mm-hmm. So the game is going to draw from two sources. One is going to be just the basic D&D stuff, spells, classes, races, rules. And then there's going to be probably a module, which is specifically the story. So compendium module is like buying the player's handbook and some sort of adventure. So the compendium stuff has already been purchased, and perhaps you've already then gone ahead and purchased one of the modules. So I'm going to name my game here. We're going to call it tutorial. And I'm going to choose a module. And for this one, I think we're going to choose Curse of Strahd because it's got a pretty great sort of opening adventure that we can use to study on. And for choose character sheet, generally speaking, if you're in D&D, you're going to want to use D&D 5e by Roll20. It's a very useful sheet. We use it all the time. You can see here from the drop-down menu, though, Call of Cthulhu, 13H, Burn Bright, Dungeon World, Pathfinder, Star Trek. There's a lot. We are going to be using D&D 5e by Roll20. So
now, one thing we should probably clarify here is, so Roll20 is not the official, it's not Wizards of the Coast, it's not the official home base of D&D. That's why there's all these other systems on there as well. But it's a thing that's used often by people who play D&D. So it's the most popular of these online platforms for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, this genre is called a VTT, or virtual tabletop. There are a few of them out there. Roll20 is the most popular and has been around the longest. And they are web-based solutions for playing collaboratively. Um, so, all right, we've got our compendium purchased already from the marketplace. We got our campaign purchased. We've made our choices. We named our game. I'm ready. Create game. So it's going ahead and adding module cursive straw to this game. Please wait. And there's a couple of things that I'm going to need to do early on is invite some players.
Yeah.
I think it would be good to have some players. For now, this is going to be a one-player game. John, congratulations. It's coming to you. Yep, I'm going to send this link. And obviously, this game will be canceled long before this video goes up. So don't try and join this game right here because it's not going to work. But is there a way for you to just grab that and type in so I don't have to blow your email address?
Myself here.
Great. Okay, so I'll go ahead and just reload this page. And my guess is that you'll pop up. There you are. So as you can see, I can promote you to GM, which I'm actually going to do because we should both be able to see everything because you're studying to be a GM here. So I'm going to promote you to GM. So you are, along with me, we are both the GM, which I think should work. I could also kick you from the game if you're being a jerk. So play nice. Token marker sets. We'll get into what token markers are. For now, all you need to know is that the default markers are perfectly fine. If you want to get some custom ones, which I have done so, you can always add them into this section here. But before we launch the game, I want to talk about a couple other things that are popping up here. The module has been successfully added. Great, I can get rid of that message. Let's talk about this message because this is a little bit of a thing. Roll20 uses a lighting system. So as your players are moving around, they can see what they can see. I mean, you know, because I DM our game, how many times you guys say to me, what do I see? And I say, you see what you see, because that's kind of how it works. And so the game is figuring out light sources and ray tracing and shadows. It's very good that way. The system that it uses right now is called Legacy Dynamic Lighting, LDL. And they are very slowly transitioning to something called Updated Dynamic Lighting, UDL, which is based on a better graphical underpinning. This message says that it is now available with all the same features and more. Convert your entire game, and I'm here to tell you, you should not do that yet. It is not available with all the same features, and it's super buggy. It is in deep beta, is what I would call it. This is an incredibly optimistic statement. And in fact, if you look in the forums, some of the people who work at Roll20 are like, okay, yes, we have a number of issues we're still working through. I think it's going to be great. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. So we're recording this in August 2020. So as of August 2020, when we're recording this, don't use it.
Do not do that. Ignore this message. It ain't ready yet. Sorry. Okay. And you can also schedule a game here. There's some, we can ignore all that. This is what we do have to look at though initially, are settings. Before we start anything, let's talk about our game settings. Because there are some choices here that are going to matter. Public access to this game, nah. Game background image, there's going to be a default one. That's going to be the image that shows up when players land on the game. Allow players to import their own characters. That's up to you. There's a pretty great way of creating characters inside this game. John, you're going to show people how that works.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I recommend. There are ways to use D&D Beyond and pipe it through using an extension, but if people are building the characters inside, you can still allow them because they may have characters they've created in other Roll20 games. So it's an easy one to say yes to. And in fact, you could pull in one of your other characters if you want, and we could skip the creation part. Brief note on browsers. Roll20 recommends Chrome or Firefox, I believe. I have found that Opera, which is a Chrome-based browser, is by far the best browser for Roll20. It seems to just tolerate it much better. The fan doesn't run as loud, all that. Let's talk about our game default settings. Oh God, look at all this crap. Don't panic. However, there are some things here that are going to kind of make your life a little bit easier as you do your campaign. The way Roll20 works, every map is a page, essentially. Now, on a page, there may be a couple of different maps. We'll see, for instance, that there might be a building that has 2 levels, and each of those levels is its own map, but it's on the same page. So your players are able to occupy 1 page at a time. And this is basically saying, here's what the default settings for those pages are. I wouldn't mess with page size. Page scale should basically stay like this. Pretty standard, 5 feet for a grid cell. This, again, unless you have some fancier method. I enable the grid because I find that players like to see that how many squares there are so they can measure their own movement. These measurements should stay the same, but let's talk about this business. As you can see here in the coming months, it will be replaced. Well, not yet. Phew. Here's what I have found to be the best method. This is just for me. Enable dynamic lighting. Skip fog of war and advanced fog of war. I do not find them particularly useful, but dynamic lighting is. I also enable enforced line of sight, which means that you can only see what you can see. And I always select restrict movement, which means that you are not able as a player to move through barriers that stop light, meaning walls, closed doors, trees, bricks. What are these other 2 things? Only update on drop and global illumination. Global illumination is a very fancy term for the lights are on. So if you, and you can adjust all these on a per page basis, but if you were on a page where the map was just an open field on a bright summer day, on that page, you would want global illumination. Everybody can see everything because the sun is up, essentially. In your dungeons, it's off. Only update on drop. Your characters are going to be moving their tokens. That's what their virtual mini is on the virtual tabletop. As they move it, drag it along, they will be able to see things. Some DMs don't want that. Some DMs feel like, well, you could cheat because you could sort of like drag and slide your thing around, look around, and then go back to your spot, and the DM would never know because you didn't actually eventually move. You weren't dropped onto a new spot. I think that's a little fussy, so I leave that off. But again, up to you. And then these guys here, we're going to get into these this business later once we get into the game, and we've got our now let's talk about these things.
Now, Craig, did you need to hit save defaults or after making those changes?
You are going to, yes. I'm going to take a look at all these things here.
Sure.
Oh yeah, because there's 2 different things, right? So let's go ahead and save defaults. You're right, because there's a different thing at the bottom for some reason. So we've saved those defaults, and that collapsed down into this here. Compendium settings. The system we're using is D&D 5th edition. And I want to say, yes, I'm sharing my compendium with my players. What that means is that all of the books that I have, and I have 5 slots of books, are available to them. And then let's see, compendium shot. Oh, these are just the modules. These things down here are these things, which are the real source books. As you can see, the ones I own, everybody has access to. So I own the Essentials Kit, the Explorer's Guide, Xanathar's, Player's Handbook, and Monster Manual. Everything in those, my players have access to in the shared compendium of the game. So I'm going to go ahead and save the compendium settings.
Now, situations where, like in one of the games we're playing, there's one player who has a character that's a race that's not one of these standard things. I don't see your book that you own, that book. It still works okay inside the system?
It doesn't. So if you want to use a character that isn't in one of these source books, it's not going to show up. It won't show up as an option, for instance, when you're building a character. Most of the things I have here cover a lot of options. They don't have Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide for some reason. There's like a whole complicated arrangement with Wizards and how these rights work. They're saying they're going to be getting it soon. I could probably at some point get Volo's guide, but in terms of the options for players and what they built, I think I got all the ones that would matter.
Okay.
Specifically on top of Player's Handbook, the Explorer's Guide and Xanathar's Guide. Those add a bunch of things. So I've saved, the compendium settings have saved successfully, but I'll hit it again just to make sure. And then our character template, this is how these character sheets are going to function. And I'm gonna leave these off for now, except for this. Let's talk about this one. So Whisper,
so Whisper rolls to GM. Okay.
Yeah, Whisper rolls to the GM. Whisper is the Roll20 all-purpose term for basically private message. So if you're whispering a roll to the GM, that means the other players don't see it. So whether you're a player or you're the GM, him or herself, other players will not see that roll. Only the GM will see it. Now, this is a philosophical point. I'm in a game where the GM rolls openly. I like to privately roll. I don't want my players seeing my rolls. And really, it comes down to this. There are times when I need to slightly fudge things, most often to help the players. Every now and again, I fudge something slightly because D&D modules are built around the assumption that there's going to be about 5 players. So if I have 7, then I may slightly, I may add maybe 1 AC to a thing, or I may maybe make one guy's save 1 point higher or something like that. So I like to keep it private. So essentially to preserve fun. If you are a GM who doesn't root for your players and feels that you're there to kill them, this is a terrible thing that you will abuse. So please, use it responsibly. But I like to say, always whisper rolls. Then when we get into the game and we look at our character sheets, we will adjust the player character sheets, just those. So they say never whisper rolls. So the GM can always see the player rolls, and all the players can see each other's. It's the NPCs that you will not see the rolls for.
Great.
The rest of these we can sort of.
Yeah. So auto damage roll. As I recall, we are auto damage rolling, aren't we?
We are. So yeah, we can take a look at these. I mean, so I like to always roll advantage. What that means is in D&D, sometimes you're rolling with advantage or disadvantage. If it's advantage, you're rolling 2 D20s and you're taking the higher number. If it's disadvantage, you're taking the lower number. Most rolls in D&D are just a regular straight up, no advantage, no disadvantage roll, and you just roll 1 D20. But the nice thing about always roll advantage is you don't have to change the setting. So every single turn, you're going to roll 2 D20. If there's no advantage or disadvantage, you just use the left number because it puts them sort of side by side in columns. If you have disadvantage, take the lower one. If you have advantage, you take the higher one. So just saves you time. Same with auto damage. We love auto damage. So every time you roll to attack, it says, look, the DM's going to have to tell you if you hit or not because he or she knows what the AC of the monster is. But if you did hit, this is the damage that would be done. So it just keeps the game moving quite a bit faster. And we tend to like it. And proficiency bonuses by level. I do like add Dex tiebreaker to initiative. I mean, this is such a huge time saver. Until it happens in Roll20 and you're like, oh, thank God. You don't realize how annoying it was in real life. So many times when you're rolling for initiative, 2 players, sometimes 3, will roll a tie.
Yeah.
And then everybody has to say, well, who's got the higher Dex? And and you have to go through this thing. In this beautiful method, the way you roll for initiative, you roll your D20, that's the number, and then it gives a decimal and then uses your dexterity as the 10th position and the 100. So if you have a dexterity of 9, and you rolled a 15, it's 15.09. Well, if somebody has dex of 11, that's 15.11. They're higher than you in the initiative. It does it automatically for you. It's quite lovely. The rest of these things we will fiddle with in a bit. And encumbrance, that's up to you. We don't use it. So I say off, but entirely up to you. Inventory compendium compatible, I think, is a good thing. Lets you use all the stuff. Yeah, I leave those as such. We don't track ammo in our games. Sometimes I think we should, but then I think, it's boring. And we'll deal with these later. I have sanity score, I think, that's a Lovecraft thing, right? That's Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, I think there's some D&D campaigns that do use it, but it's like Cthulhu, D&D kind of combo stuff.
Got it.
Honor score I've seen in other things like that.
Yeah. So I went ahead and saved those. So we're all saved here. So we've set we've saved our settings. I'm going to go back to tutorial. We're almost ready to launch ourselves into the game. I just do want to show you one other thing before we do. See this? You make it go away, it keeps coming back. I'm so frustrated with this. I got to tell you, like, I really do like this company and I like this service. This one is just inexplicable to me. Anyway, go away. These are some obvious things: deleting a game, copying game for backing up and stuff. I just want to talk about API scripts for 1 second. We'll come back to it later. This is a scary little bit because it involves JavaScript and all this other stuff. But I'm just going to show you that there's this library of add-ons. And once we get into the game, we'll come back and take a look at how those work. But a number of these are incredibly useful, not only for the DM, but for the players. Here's one that we use all the time: carry tokens, for instance. So we'll get into that later. But now I think it's time for us to launch the game, shall we?
Let's do it.